I want to come back to the issue of the ownership of tissue, and what we need to do as proactive patients and medical consumers to respect what comes out of our bodies and not be afraid to demand the exchange of our tissue, especially if one is facing a disease that will likely take their life. What better way to bring meaning to your experience than to know that it served a greater good? Also trying to get answers for yourself. Talk about wanting to have some sense of control.
Whenever any researcher has looked at this, patients are eager to donate their tissue to science, to know that what comes from their bodies might be used by science to help others. It's a tremendous untapped potential. And in the area where I focus, in metastatic cancer, most patients are still being treated on the basis of the markers, the information gleaned from their primary tissue, because most
and
of
from
them
the
have had
microscope and not from the molecular laboratory, which is
well,
totally different.
Definitely that. I mean, that's not even within view. But now we have a number of studies that show that these sort of fundamental biomarkers that they do measure on primary cancer often change in metastatic disease, and they can really influence the course of treatment and the longevity of women once they do have recurrences. So that's even setting aside the issue of genomic analysis, which I think for most patients and most physicians is not even on the radar yet. It is the future,
and
for sure.
I think patients who don't know this would be outraged to find out that there's conflict and a lack of sharing of tissue information. It's not a matter of patient confidentiality here. It's my right.
It's a matter of ownership.
Yes. What goes on within industry? We were speaking with one of the physicians, and I know you're quite knowledgeable in this area, with companies, and once tissue goes to companies, is it true that there are real problems in getting them to relinquish these specimens to researchers outside of their own companies?
Of course there are. I mean, I think the attitude is, this is my impression, based on the couple of studies that I've been involved with that do collect blood and tissue, that if they're funding the study, if they're setting up all the mechanism to gather and store that blood and tissue, that it is reserved for the exclusive use of that company to develop products that will help patients. They don't see that in any kind of conflicted way.
How does then our tissue land up in perhaps a pharmaceutical laboratory or into another researcher's laboratory?
Well, the only way a pharmaceutical company or a biotech company would acquire tissue is as a result of tissue collection in clinical trials that they conduct. And these can be at any phase of development. And I can tell you that tissue collection as a part of clinical trials is relatively new. It just, because it represents a major expense. And I think, speaking from an advocacy perspective, it was not in the financial interest of the pharmaceutical industry to limit the applicability of the drugs that they developed. So they weren't really looking for molecular markers because their interest was to sell drugs as broadly as they could. So breast cancer is actually one of the few cancers that had early markers because we had the estrogen receptor and then we had HER2. But most drugs have been marketed to an unselected population. And so tissues were not collected because it didn't seem relevant. It's really within the last 5 to 10 years, really, that we're seeing clinical trials actually routinely sampling tissue and storing it. And those companies, when you think about it, they're thinking about their future development of drugs, and they have scientists who are working on those tissues, both there and at academic institutions, to see what more can be learned. And that's a good thing, because that's where the dollars are, for the most part, for the research. The problem with it is that it's proprietary. And I think collaborative work, where there is a sharing of tissue and a sharing of information, is going to advance the science more rapidly. This is the great frustration.
But it's so logical, and that's any other way is counterintuitive. It only makes sense that if you are, whatever your disease type interest is, is that if as much tissue can be shared amongst researchers focused on the same goal. And I understand that there are political and financial impediments that keep it difficult.
And there are also, it goes even beyond that, there are career building impediments. You know this.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, within institutions and for individual researchers. It's a very competitive field. The field of cancer research is set up so that everybody competes for grants. And so, for example, from the National Cancer Institute and others. And so there is an incentive for people to hold what they know very closely, even when it's clear that more could be learned. Now, I've been working for the last 5 years with a center of excellence that is studying brain metastasis in breast cancer, and that's funded by the Department of Defense Breast Cancer Research Program. We're just almost at the end of that grant, and it's founded on the idea that if you get a whole group of researchers and advocates and clinicians together from different disciplines and have them share what they know and share their work as it evolves, that you will get more rapid, accelerated process. And we have been able to acquire really rare tissue. For example, matched tissues from women at primary diagnosis and from brain metastasis, which is virtually unheard of in this day and age because we don't biopsy brain metastasis. The primary treatment for brain metastasis is radiation, which destroys the tissue. So even if one were to be able to get tissue from a person after they die, it would be useless because it's been radiated. And the advent of radiosurgery, which targets tumors in the brain and treats them, where before this you would have a craniotomy and the tissue would be removed and analyzed. That's rarely happening now. It's not that it never happens, but understanding the genomic nature of brain metastasis is only possible if we look at primary tumor and metastatic tumor.
Yes,
You've got to have the tissue.
I think one of the most important things we could do as research advocates and advocates in general is to really help patients. And this message, I just don't think it's out there. I don't think the average patient knows this, that we have to become, now is the time to become aggressive about who owns our tissue, the right that we have to disseminate our tissue. I think this could be probably one of the most important advances we could do within advocacy. It is the future. It's the root for anything that we can succeed with for the ultimate goal of personalized medicine and developing biologic therapies and understanding.
I agree.
Otherwise, what was the point then of the Human Genome Project? What is the point of even going down the road of personalized medicine if we don't do this? because we're going to hit at some point. It's like opening up Pandora's box and then hitting a brick wall.
Yes, and the name of the brick wall is the proprietary competitive nature of research in general. It's not just in cancer, it's elsewhere. But right now, no mechanism exists whereby patients who are very willing, generally, to contribute tissue for research can actually be the recipients and owners of that tissue.
But I don't know if we've done an adequate job of yet attempting to mobilize. It's not just patients, it's society.
No, and there are many researchers who will agree with, and clinicians who will be on our side with this, and who have been looking at what's happening to tissue with real concern, because they see how it impedes progress. I mean, quite apart from the issue of it's the patient's right, it's not what's going to get us where we need to go. So, in my view, there needs to be some sort of effort to really get people together, to get patients, advocates, clinicians, researchers together, to really try to formulate how we could proceed in a different way that would be patient-centered, where we own our tissue and where we are active participants in the process of research in that way.
Musa, it's been a real pleasure getting to know you and working with you at the San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposium. And that's one of the beautiful components of these conferences. You get to meet people who have been on parallel paths and in different parts of the country, and then you come to these meetings where you've got people from all over the world in one place collectively, and then you get to sit down like this, and this is how great things begin.
Thank you for your vision and your sense of what really matters in the research enterprise, Selma.
Thank you for what you've done, and that you really had the courage and the heart and the capacity, because it takes a kind of commitment and intelligence to be able to take your life experience and use it in a transformative way, which you clearly have done. So I congratulate you as well.
Thank you.